Welcome. It is Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz, Ben Ferguson with you, and it's so nice to have you with us around the country, wherever you are listening on radio stations all over. And we have got a lot to talk about in today's show, including the fact that, Senator, it wasn't just enough that they wanted to spy on your cell phone records. They decided, screw it, we'll just tap like federal lines in your office.
The Biden administration has been caught spying on now 9 U.S. senators, 20% of the Republicans in the Senate. Jack Smith issued subpoenas to spy on and to get our cell phone records. I was one of the 9. We now know also that Judge Boasberg, who is this left-wing radical judge who keeps issuing national injunctions against President Trump, signed at least an order to me concerning me, ordering AT&T not to tell me that DOJ was trying to get my phone records, because the judge concluded with zero basis that I was likely to destroy evidence and to tamper with witnesses. It is an absolute disgrace. We're going to break it down. We're going to talk about the accountability that needs to flow from this. We're also going to talk about the shutdown that keeps on going and going and going. Day 31 in the Schumer shutdown with no end in sight. We're going to talk about where the shutdown stands. And finally, an extraordinary story. Bill Gates reverses his position on climate change. He's been telling the world we're all going to die. Now he's saying, never mind, it's all going to be fine. All of that we've got on today's pod.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I also want to tell you about an amazing opportunity that we have for you as a listener to the show. And Hillsdale College right now is offering more than 40 online courses. That's right, more than 40 online courses for free to Verdict listeners. You can learn about the works of C.S. Lewis, the stories in the book of Genesis, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution, the rise and the fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of ancient Christian church, all with Hillsdale College's free online courses. Hillsdale College has been influencing conservatives and Christians for decades, and this is your chance to take some of the best classes for free. I'm personally taking Constitution 101. It is a course that you explore the design and the purpose of the Constitution, the challenges it faced during the Civil War, and how it has been undermined for more than a century by the radical left. Now, this 12-lecture course is also self-paced, so you can start when you want to, take it whenever you want to. Maybe you got a long flight and you want to dial in there. Wherever you want to study, you get to study at your pace. So what are you waiting for? Go and check out all of the 40 classes that you can take, again, for Verdict listeners for free. Go to hillsdale.edu/verdict to enroll. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/verdict to enroll for free. Hillsdale.edu/verdict and get started on learning courses that you normally would have to pay for. You get them for free right now. All right, Senator, so let's just remind people how this all started with Arctic frost. What was the basis of Arctic frost? And now what we've learned about the reality of Arctic frost, which is this was no more than abuse of government power. It was a spying expedition on 20% of the Republicans in the Senate. And not only that, but also conservative influential organizations and individuals as well, we're learning.
That's exactly right. We now know that Jack Smith issued 197 different subpoenas targeting more than 400 Republicans, targeting 9 U.S. senators, targeting a House member, targeting Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA, targeting the Republican Attorney General's Association, systematically going after, in a widespread basis, a fishing expedition attacking his political opponents on the Senate side. So the senators who had subpoenas issued against them were Marsha Blackburn, Lindsey Graham, Bill Hagerty, Josh Hawley, Ron Johnson, Cynthia Lummis, Dan Sullivan, and Tommy Tuberville, and then yours truly. For the first 8, their cell phones were all with Verizon, and Jack Smith sent the subpoena to Verizon, and Verizon complied and gave their cell phone records to the Department of Justice. My cell phone was with AT&T. AT&T got a subpoena for my cell phone records and AT&T did not comply. Their legal counsel concluded that the speech and debate clause of the Constitution protected my communications, and they did not comply. And that we now know. And just this week, I did a press conference with the other Republican senators talking about this issue. I want you to listen to this is me describing just the scope of how serious and grave this is. Arctic frost is Joe Biden's Watergate. Merrick Garland was a fundamentally corrupt attorney general. Jack Smith was a fundamentally corrupt prosecutor. This was a political enemies list from the beginning. 197 subpoenas for 430 Republican entities and individuals. That is an absolute and egregious abuse of power.
Is there any scenario there, Senator, where you look at this and you hear them and you think they could have even for a moment thought they were doing legitimate work? I mean, when you think about the scope of this for people that are listening, this just seems like they said, rules be damned, laws be damned. We're going to spy on 20% of the Republican senators. That is bigger than Watergate. And then all these other organizations that we think are helping conservative movements, we're to spy on them too. Like, what were they even looking for?
Look, I think Jack Smith is a partisan zealot. I think Merrick Garland is a partisan zealot. I think they eagerly weaponize the Department of Justice. Jack Smith was appointed as the special prosecutor to go after President Trump 3 days after President Trump announced his 2024 campaign. So this all happened 2 years after January 6th.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have happened if Donald Trump had decided I'm not running in 2024. I don't think Jack Smith is ever appointed. I don't think these prosecutions happen. The reason they happen is Donald Trump announced he was running in 2024, and immediately, with 3 days later, Jack Smith was appointed, and this was about target our political enemies. Let's go after them. I think Merrick Garland presided over the most partisan Department of Justice this country's ever seen. And I think Merrick Garland is still seething with rage. Remember, Merrick Garland, Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court to fill the seat when Antonin Scalia passed away. And in 2016,
had power,
in 2016, it was the spring of 2016, and we decided we're going to keep the seat vacant and let the voters decide in November of 2016 who's going to fill it. And, of course, that ended up being filled by Neil Gorsuch instead of Merrick Garland. I think Merrick Garland seethes with resentment, and he used that resentment to fuel, let's go after the Republicans, let's target them, let's target Donald Trump, let's turn the Department of Justice into an arm of the DNC. And I think Kamala Harris and the Democrats were all eagerly on board with that.
There's a strategy here, and if they didn't trust you to know that you were being subpoenaed and your records were being subpoenaed, and other conservatives were not going to be told as well. You mentioned that earlier. They said, no, we can't trust Senator Cruz. And I'm assuming that was just a blanket across the board thing because everyone knew how corrupt this was, and they would fight back instantly, I'm sure. But was this to spy to see who's working with who? Because if you didn't know what was happening, it may not be as much about intimidation as it was connecting dots, or was it to try to find something they could charge them with criminally? Explain the logic here behind Jack Smith.
This was a fishing expedition. They were sweeping broadly. They were just trying to find evidence of wrongdoing and going as broadly as they could. And I got to say, I used to work at the Department of Justice. I was an associate deputy attorney general back in 2001 and when George W. Bush was president. The idea that you would authorize subpoenas for 9 U.S. senators, for 20% of the Republicans in the Senate, or for that matter, for 20% of the Democrats, that you would do the opposing party, there has never been a Department of Justice that wouldn't that would be willing to do that. That right. Is an extraordinary step, and it's a sign of just how corrupt these folks got. But it's not just the prosecutors. It's not just Jack Smith. They had, I think, an extreme partisan judge, Judge Boasberg, who has been one of the worst actors when it comes to issuing these nationwide injunctions. We've talked about him before. And the order he signed concerning the subpoena directed at my phone records, I believe, was an absolute corruption of his judicial oath. And here's what I called for. I called for him to be impeached.
Yeah, there was a great clip, and you're going to hear Senator Grassley talking at the press conference, and then your comments also you made on Newsmax about it. Take a listen.
That includes a hard line for Senator Cruz's office and a staffer's cell phone for former Senator Loeffler.
So they tried to subpoena Verizon to tap the office phone in your office?
Well, to get the phone records, and they also subpoenaed AT&T to get my cell phone records. And I'll tell you, AT&T did the right thing. They refused to comply with the subpoena. Their legal counsel concluded that it was protected by the speech and debate clause of the Constitution. But you know, one of the things that is amazing, along with that subpoena they sent to AT&T, they also included an order from Judge Boasberg, who's one of these left-wing radical judges who's issuing nationwide injunctions. Judge Boasberg ordered AT&T, do not tell Cruz we are subpoenaing his cell phone records. Why? And he makes a conclusion. He says, because I conclude if he's informed, Cruz will destroy or tamper with evidence and intimidate witnesses. That is utterly without factual basis. It is a complete abuse of judicial power. And I've called on the House of Representatives to impeach Judge Boasberg. The Constitution, when Judge Boasberg decided to become a partisan warrior and be part of the most egregious abuse of power, this is Joe Biden's Watergate. And I believe the House should impeach Judge Boasberg. And I also think we are going to get to the bottom of every partisan who signed off on surveilling and spying on 20% of the Republicans in the Senate. That's what Joe Biden and their DOJ did.
You just put that number into perspective, Senator. I mean, 20% is unbelievable. And you talked about the House taking this up. Is there a real chance that they're going to do this?
I think there is, and it's going to be a decision for the Speaker, for Mike Johnson, and for Jim Jordan, the Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, but I think they will. And let me actually read from the order that Judge Boasberg signed. He signed an order where he says, quote, "The court finds reasonable grounds to believe that such disclosure," in other words, if AT&T told me that they were subpoenaing my phone records, "that such disclosure will result in destruction of or tampering with evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, and serious jeopardy to the investigation." Now, that statement, and by the way, I have no reason to think that was unique to me. My assumption, although we have not seen the subpoenas for the other 8 senators, my assumption is that Judge Boasberg signed it for all 9 of us, that he was printing them out like placemats at Denny's. If you're a Republican senator, that's all he needs to know to conclude. And let me read again what he signed. "The court finds reasonable grounds to believe that such disclosure will result in destruction of or tampering with evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, and serious jeopardy to the investigation." And let me say, if DOJ came and represented that to the judge, that is sanctionable. There's no factual basis. That's the sort of order you put in if you're issuing a subpoena for the mafia, for the mob, for a drug cartel, not simply the fact that, well, it's a senator of the opposing party, so we're going to represent to you that they're going to destroy evidence. I believe that the judge had absolutely zero basis to conclude that. There was no evidence of that. I don't know if DOJ made that representation or not, but the judge, there was no hearing on it. We certainly didn't know about it. It is utterly absurd to say that 9 senators are going to go destroy evidence and tamper with witnesses. He signed that, and when he signed that, he was no longer being a judge. He was being a partisan. It is clear this man hates Republicans and is willing to act on his partisan animus, and I think that is why the House should impeach him and the Senate should convict him.
2 questions quickly. 1, do you think that there may be other senators out there that we don't know about? And 2, a lot of this information we've been getting is because of people that are coming forward, whistleblowers. How important are they going to be moving forward? Because if this is what they were doing in this scenario, I can't imagine what else was going on that we don't know about. There could be other spying expeditions that were taking place on House members on a completely different set of issues.
Well, look, we know 430 Republicans were the targets of these subpoenas. There may be more. You're right. It's whistleblowers who have come forward with this. We wouldn't know without the whistleblowers. And I'll tell you an interesting little factoid. Sean Davis of the Federalist reported, he said, Arctic Frost, the code name used for this operation, was not a randomly generated code name, which is how these operations generally get their name.
Yeah, that's important.
Arctic Frost is a cultivar of orange that thrives in Florida but can also withstand cold weather. The code name was deliberately chosen by corrupt federal agents because the entire purpose was to take down Donald Trump, the orange man who lives in Florida. This was corrupted. It was political targeting.
Want to take a moment and talk to you about an incredible company. It is a company that is called Patriot Mobile. They have been in business now for more than 12 years. I use Patriot Mobile. And the reason why is because not only do I get incredible nationwide coverage, but I also saved money on my bill. And then the magic part of being with a conservative company is this. Patriot Mobile takes about 5% of your bill every month, and they give it back month after month, year after year, to conservative causes that fight to protect our First and our Second Amendment rights, the rights of unborn children. And they also stand with men and women that wear a uniform, that wear a badge, men and women in law enforcement, men and women that served in Iraq, Afghanistan, around the world. And they take care of families who have lost loved ones serving and protecting this country. That is why I made the switch to Patriot Mobile. Now, look, it's going to be amazing coverage. That matters, right? You're going to get unbelievable coverage with Patriot Mobile. So if you like the coverage you have now, you're going to love Patriot Mobile. And switching has never been easier. When I made the switch, I did it over the phone, and they did it in about 10 minutes. So stop giving your money to woke companies that are fighting against your values. You may not know this, but Big Mobile gives big donations to Democratic parties, organizations, causes, and even organizations that pay for abortions. So don't have your money go there. Go with Patriot Mobile, and we're going to give you a free month of service as well. Go to patriotmobile.com/verdict. That's patriotmobile.com/verdict. Or call them at 972-PATRIOT. And when you use the promo code VERDICT, you're going to get a free month of service. So switch today. It's so easy. patriotmobile.com/verdict or 972-PATRIOT. Promo code VERDICT for a free month of service. All right, Senator, so I want to move to a topic that we teased earlier, and it's also a pretty big one. The government shutdown, we're now seeing polling data. I'm looking at my screen over here, and it really is fun to see this backfire in the Democrats' face. They've been holding America hostage. They keep negotiating the hostage deadline and extending it. It is disgusting to see how much they're trying to hurt Americans, trying to withhold food stamps, trying to withhold military pay, government pay. The list goes on. They want this to hurt because they assume that the American people are so ignorant that they're just going to blame the top of the food chain, a.k.a. President Donald Trump. But the data is showing that is a disaster for them right now. And in fact, Donald Trump's approval rating has gone up, not down during the government shutdown. Your reaction to that?
Well, that's exactly right. This is backfiring badly on the Democrats. But before we dive into that, I want to tell you a fun story that you'll like. So my press secretary was down in New Orleans, and she took an Uber to go to her hotel. And the Uber driver was a fella named Dax, and they struck up a conversation, and she mentioned that she worked for me. And he said, I listen to Verdict every week. I listen to it on the radio here in New Orleans. And he told her, well, like what time it aired. And he was a regular listener. That was very cool. And so everyone who's listening on the radio, everyone who's listening to the podcast, I just wanted to say thank you. We're doing this to give you information you can't get anywhere else. And to Dax, if you're listening, thank you, especially for listening. We're glad to have you and appreciate you. Isn't that cool?
It's awesome. That's the best. Like when you have an Uber or Lyft driver, it's like, oh yeah, I listen to every, like those are that is what I envision as we do the show, is people like that working hard, providing for their families, and they just want to know someone's fighting for them.
Absolutely. Look, today is Halloween. It's 31 days into the shutdown, and the Democrats have not budged an inch.
Yeah.
31 days, the federal government is closed. The non-essential functions are shut down. We're seeing thousands upon thousands of federal workers who are not getting paychecks. Let's take airports. Airports right now, there are 50,000 TSA agents who are going into work, and they're not getting a paycheck. They've missed their last paycheck. There are 14,000 air traffic controllers. They're going into work. They're not getting a paycheck. And you know what we're seeing? We're seeing as a result of that, more and more delays, more and more ground stops in Houston, ground stops in LA, ground stops in DC. They want that. One senior Democrat aide told Politico that the Schumer shutdown will keep going. He said, quote, until planes start falling from the sky. That's what they're looking for. Tomorrow, Saturday, November 1st, 41 million people are not going to get the food stamps they would have otherwise gotten. Now, it's actually 42 million. Yeah. Now, set aside the fact that the number of people on food stamps has doubled in the last 5 years. That is a major problem, and it is a failure of the policies of the Biden administration. But there are 42 million people who were expecting Saturday morning to get their food stamps, and they're not going to get it. And they're not going to get it because the Democrats are voting. You don't get food stamps. Air traffic controllers, you don't get paid. TSA agents, you don't get paid. FBI agents, you don't get paid. Customs and Border Patrol, you don't get paid. ICE, you don't get paid. General federal worker, you don't get paid.
Well,
and by the way, the Democrat congressmen and senators, almost all of them are taking their own paychecks, the members of Congress. I'm not. I said I wouldn't take my paycheck as long as the government shut down, but most of the Democrats are happily depositing their own money.
Let's be very clear to people listening, just like Dax down there in New Orleans. There have been moments where Republicans have said, hey, let's at least take, for example, not giving people their food stamps off the table. And Democrats have still said, no, we won't do that bipartisan piece with you. We've said the same thing for FAA and military. They want this people to suffer. They've had the opportunity to have, in essence, a carve out, and they've chosen no every time because they want people to suffer, period.
No, that's right. And I'll tell you, the media knows that this is a partisan shutdown. Here, give a listen to Jake Tapper. Now, Jake Tapper is hardly a conservative, but even he on CNN is calling BS to the Democrats' talking points. Give a listen.
Should the Democratic senators from New Mexico, your home state, vote to open the government so that these SNAP funds are not at risk?
Let me be clear. The administration is choosing to starve American children with money that they already have appropriated.
I'm not applauding their
by
tactics.
The White House.
Well,
this is a choice by the White House.
This
they
is
are
also,
choosing
Congresswoman,
to
this is
cut
also
off
a
food
choice
assistance.
by Senate Democrats
No,
to not
it is
vote
not.
to open the government. Yes, it is. I understand why they're doing it. They're doing it because they want Medicaid funds restored. They're doing it because they want Obamacare premiums to be extended past the end of the year. I understand the reasoning.
Sir, let me just be clear. The money for contingency plans is sitting there. That is why the states are suing. The White House is withholding funds from
2 to 3 weeks worth of
have
SNAP funds.
Food.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it may not be a big deal to you, but let me tell you that for the grandparents, for grandparents that literally are feeding their children,
my point is that it's a short-term solution.
In those accounts,
it's a short-term.
At the end of the day, people need to be able to feed their families, and Saturday is when those funds run out.
If you feel so
and
strongly,
we are fighting
Congresswoman,
to get
why
that
not
funding.
ask the Senate Democrats from New Mexico to vote to open the government so that the SNAP funds...
Sir, I am here in the House of Representatives. It is shut down. I am fighting to get the government reopened. I am fighting to get funding put back into SNAP that is already existent, and I am fighting for the American people. I am here. But show me a single Republican that is here. Not a single one is here to make sure that Americans are fed on Saturday. That is why I am here.
I love how right there, and it just made me laugh, how even Jake Tapper's like, you're totally full of crap. Like, you can say this all you want to, but they put it together. You guys keep saying no. And she's like, I'm here. They're all gone. By the way, I'm sure there was a Republican congressperson that was there.
Of course there were. But
yeah.
Look, Jake Tapper, as he put it, he says this is a choice by Senate Democrats to not vote to open the government. And she says, no, it is not. And he says, yes, it is. Yeah. And we've done this 13 times. I voted repeatedly this week to open the government. If you want the food stamps to go out, the Democrats had it in their power to do that. All they had to do was vote yes to fund the government, and they had multiple opportunities, and the Democrats all voted no, or all but three, I think, voted no. The reason the Democrats have been able to force this shutdown is in order to move a funding bill in the Senate, it takes 60 votes. There are only 53 Republicans. Republicans, we are voting to open the government. We're voting over and over and over again. And 13 times the Democrats have voted, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. And this is the stupidest shutdown we have ever seen because the Democrats really are just trying to show off to their partisan base that they hate Donald Trump. The reason you're having a shutdown, the reason people are not being paid, the reason your flights are being delayed, the reason food stamps are not going out tomorrow is because the Democrats are trying to Chuck Schumer in particular is trying to prove to the activists marching in the No Kings rallies that he really, really, really hates Donald Trump. They're going to end up caving. But I'll tell you what, my prediction is they won't cave before next Tuesday because Tuesday's election day in Virginia and New Jersey. And bizarrely enough, they think their base is energized by the Democrats shutting down the government.
All right, so this one is just one of those segments that I'm just going to enjoy. Bill Gates is a guy that was like, the world's going to end, Senator, and we're all going to, die of heat, and global warming's real, and I'm investing in all these projects and things, and the government should be doing the same. And now he's like, all right, screw it, it's not going to happen. It reminds me, I think it was Newsweek back in the 80s, where they said we were all going to freeze to death from like Arctic freezing of the entire globe. Now that went away too. So they got it wrong in the 80s. And now Bill Gates is admitting, and Al Gore, remember, we were supposed to be dead like after 10 years, and that was like 10 years ago when he made his prediction that we were all going to die of global warming. None of it's actually happened, and so now Bill Gates is like, all right, screw it, I was wrong, I guess.
So it wasn't 10 years, it was 12 years, and for some reason, for the apocalyptic left, the world is always ending in 12 years, and that's been true for about 2 decades now. They've been saying 12 years from now, we're all going to die. 12 years from now, we're all going to die. And I got to say, Bill Gates was willing to be as hysterical as Greta, the European teenager who shut down the German economy because they listened to a teenager and said, hey, why don't we shut down all of our nuclear power plants? And then they suddenly realized they couldn't power their country. And ironically enough, instead, they're now opening coal plants and polluting a lot more. So the apocalypse, the world is ending because of climate change. Well, look, all right, don't necessarily believe me. Let me just read what Bill Gates has done. So this is from Daily Wire. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates has done an about-face on climate change alarmism, recently saying that there are more pressing matters people should be worrying about instead. The 70-year-old tech billionaire, who has been an outspoken environmental activist for years, said as much in a memo published Tuesday titled 3 Tough Truths About Climate. Here's what he wrote. Climate change, disease, and poverty are all major problems. We should deal with them in proportion to the suffering they cause. The businessman admitted that the Earth's temperature is not the most important factor for improving life on the planet, and said the, quote, doomsday view of climate change is wrong. Let me read that again. Bill Gates said the doomsday view of climate change is wrong. Here's what he wrote, quote, although climate change will have serious consequences, particularly for people in the poorest countries, it will not lead to humanity's demise. Shocking that Bill Gates said that. And here he goes on to say, quote.
Wait, hold on, does that mean he can fly on his private jets now and like take a nap, not be like having to buy carbon credits or get on his yacht? I'm just confused. I want to be cleared here. What does this free him up to do?
Oh, no. The carbon credit scam is definitely still on, but he's going to keep flying on his jet. And remember, by the way, John Kerry, the zealot, when he discussed his private plane, he said, he flies private because he says, really, for someone like me, it's the only reasonable way to travel.
Yes.
Like the utter hypocrisy. But here's what Gates wrote. This is a chance to refocus on the metric that should count even more than emissions and temperature change. Improving lives. Our chief goal should be to prevent suffering, particularly for those in the toughest conditions who live in the world's poorest countries. And he added, quote, although climate change will hurt poor people more than anyone else, for the vast majority of them, it will not be the only or even the biggest threat to their welfare. And he wrote this 17-page analysis ahead of next month's United Nations Climate Change Conference in Brazil, hoping to shift funding away from climate initiatives towards other endeavors that he now believes are more important. Look, I don't know about you, but I'm not tired of winning. I mean, this is... Climate change was an excuse.
So it was all a scam to make a bunch of money? Is that what we can kind of get to here? It was just about follow the money.
Money and power. There's a lot of money, a whole lot of money about it. But power, look, for Democrats, if you are a socialist, if you are a communist, if you are Comrade Mamdani,
Yeah.
I assume he's a climate change nut. I don't actually know that, but I know he's a communist, and climate change was the excuse for communists to seize control of our government. And that today's Democrat Party, it was a great, we're all going to die unless you let me, the Democrat politician, control the energy and business and your life and regulate every aspect of your life. The fact that Bill Gates is making this change, it really shows the momentum is moving and people are engaged in just common sense is coming back.
Well, and not only common sense, but like you look at a lot of these solar farms, they're like being dormanted right now. Like they're just shutting them down because they just can't work. They're not working. And the pollution that comes actually from the turbines and all the other things they're actually saying is like having a real negative effect on the environment. Shocker there. And then we also found out that like a pension fund in California lost like 70+% of the investment that they went in green alternative energy that just came out. So like they screwed countless hardworking, even liberals in California with this crap.
And a point to understand, the climate change radicals have consistently hurt the environment. They are bad on the environment. If the only thing you care about, if you wake up every morning praying to Mother Earth, if that's your only voting issue, you should vote against Democrats. Why? Let's take, for example, Germany. The Greens forced nuclear power plants to be closed. The result is today Germany is relying more on coal, which is much, much worse for the environment. And what country leads the world every year in the reduction of carbon emissions?
Which one?
That would be the United States of America. Do you know why?
Why is that?
Look, this is a question actually I pose when I'm on a college campus, when I'm talking to college kids and they're Bernie Sanders supporters and they're freaked out about the climate. I'll ask them a question. I'll say, tell me, what human being has done the most to reduce climate in our lifetimes? And inevitably, they have no idea. There is an objectively right answer. The right answer to this is George Mitchell. Now, who is George Mitchell? George Mitchell was a Texas oil man. He was the son of a Greek goat herder. And George Mitchell is the man most responsible for pioneering fracking. And he did it in the Barnett Shale under Fort Worth and Dallas. Fracking unlocked the shale revolution, which resulted in massive production of natural gas, much of it in Texas, although also in Pennsylvania and Ohio and other states across the country. And the reason the United States every year leads the world in the reduction of carbon emissions is because at a wide scale level, we are replacing coal-powered electricity generation with natural gas-powered electricity generation, and that pollutes much, much less. It emits much less carbon. And the Greens and the radical Dems have opposed that at every step. By the way, do you know what country leads the world in pollution?
What's that?
That would be communist China, which pollutes massively, and yet the Biden administration bear hugged them with all they had.
There you go. Don't forget, we do this show to talk about things just like this. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Hit that subscribe or auto download button wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. You can also tell Siri or Alexa, grab Verdict with Ted Cruz or play it, and it will do it for you automatically there as well. And the Senator and I will see you back here on this radio station next week where you're listening right now, or on the podcast. If you're listening there, wherever you get your podcasts, we'll see you back here again this week on the podcast.